Well, good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to Rushcliffe Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting. I'll remind you that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel, and a recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the same YouTube channel. In addition, other people may film, record, post on social media or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to please switch off your microphones when you're not speaking. Thank you. By way of introduction, my name's Rex Walker. I'm the chair of this committee. To my left, Councillor Georgiou, the vice chair, and officers supporting this evening, supporting us this evening: Shazza Brannan, assistant director of planning; Andrew Cullen, planning manager; James Bates, team manager, monitoring and implementation; Andrea Baxter, team manager; and Alison Walker, borough solicitor. So moving on to the agenda, apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Thomas, with Councillor Way substituting, and also apologies from Councillor Wells, with Councillor P. Matthews substituting.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? In that case, we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Are we happy that
one of the applications, whilst it's not in my ward, it is in the ward that I live in? So I just wanted to, don't know whether I need to declare that as an interest or not.
Thanks for letting us know. The minutes, are we happy that they're an accurate record of the previous meeting? Okay, do the honours with those. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to what brought us here, this evening, and the first substantive item relates to 6 Wolford Lane, West Bridgford, and I'll hand over to Mr. Bates to make a presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application to fell a single cedar tree at number 6 Wolford Lane in West Bridgford. The site is near the junction with Wolford Lane, Loughborough Road. The property is in a commercial use. You can see the tree there just to the west of the building. It is located alongside an access to a car park, which sits at the rear of the property. We've got some photographs just to show how visible the tree is. The tree is visible from Wolford Lane and also from the riverside. It is more prominent from the riverside than it is from Wolford Lane. So the tree in question is the tree that is just visible over the roof of the building in this view. And in this view here, you can just see it growing out of the access road immediately adjacent to this low boundary wall. There are concerns that the tree has dropped limbs in the past. This is fairly typical of cedars. It's not an indication of ill health. It's something that they do as they grow. It also means that it's quite difficult to predict when it might happen and which limb it might happen to. As you move into the site, again, the tree is this one here. It does overhang parts of the building to a small degree, and it also overhangs the boundary with the neighbouring property. It is not possible to access the car park at the rear without passing under the canopy of the tree. So if any limbs did fall, there is always a risk that a vehicle or a person may be passing at the unfortunate time. View on the right is from the car park looking back towards Wolford Lane. Just some close-ups. The boundary wall is in very close proximity. There is very little indication of damage to it. It is leaning very slightly but not in a way that would lead you to believe that it's structurally unsound. This section of wall does appear to have been rebuilt. It is in different brickwork to the brickwork on the other side of this buttress. Whether that's been rebuilt because the tree has damaged it in the past is unclear, but that's certainly one explanation. And the surfacing of the tarmac on the access road is quite badly disrupted by tree roots. There is an indication that that disruption extends all the way up to the wall of the building. No indication of any structural damage to that building at the moment, but the tree has not finished growing. Roots are clearly in proximity to the wall, and that is something that could happen in future. Just going back further out to the riverside frontage, again, we've got another collection of images. So the tree on this top image is this tree here in the centre, seen in the backdrop of the car park, with some other trees along that boundary. In this image from the suspension bridge, it is this tree here, seen over the roofs of the properties to the west of the application site. In this view, which is to the southwest of the bridge, that is purely there to show you that you cannot see the tree from further along the riverside path to the southwest, but it does show that there are a lot of other trees that are visible in this area. From the northeast of the suspension bridge, the tree is this one here, seen just next to Welbeck Hall in that view. And there is one more view from the opposite bank of the river, and again the tree is the one visible over the roofs of those buildings there. Sorry, I said one more. The tree in that view again is this one here. There are other trees in the area around. So it's a fairly balanced application that's been submitted. The tree is not in poor health, but it does overhang the building. If it has not already outgrown its position, it is likely to do so in the future. It has not finished growing. Our tree officer, Tom Pettit, viewed this as a very balanced application and was weighing up the prominence of the tree versus the potential risks of the tree, damage to buildings, possible dropping limbs. In an effort to try and come to a decision one way or another, Tom took the step of undertaking a tree assessment. So this is the assessment that the tree officer would undertake when considering a tree for protection. Tree in this case is already protected, but it's an exercise. If it wasn't, would we protect it today? In order to benefit from protection, the various threads of assessment should add up to a score of 11 or more. When carrying out the assessment, Tom concluded that the tree falls just short of that, receiving a score of 10. There is a proposal to plant 2 replacement trees following felling. These would be in a location at the riverside edge of the site in this back corner of the car park. There was a tree there previously up until about 4 or 5 years ago, and the proposal is to plant trees which have a more vertical shape, that don't spread as much. Fastigate beech trees, 2 replacement trees for the one to be lost in a location that will be more prominent from the riverside path. It's me done, Chair.
Thank you. Now we have 2 people registered to speak. The first is Mr. Leshuk, the agent for the applicant. So I invite you to come. Please, now, please take your time. When you're ready, it's the button on the right-hand side of the speaker there. If you're still speaking after 4.5 minutes, we'll give you a reminder that there's 30 seconds to go.
Okay, I'm the consultant arborist dealing with the application. One of the problems up to my background is I've got a certificate in arboriculture from Brooksby and Melton. I've got professional tree inspection certificate as well as all the other city and guilds arboricultural qualifications that you need. The client was particularly worried about the premature needle drop, and I think I suggested in the application at the time that I suspected Pseudococcus blight, which would cause yellowing and pinkish needles to fall. The photograph on the left with the bin, that's on one day, like the day after a windy day after it had already been cleared. So it's, but at the time I couldn't definitively say that that was the case. But then since going back to review the tree, I've done further inspections. Is there another photograph of the foliage of the tree? So if you see the yellowing and the pinkish ends of the needles, that's typical of the Pseudococcus sugae. That's a fungal pathogen that affects the foliage of the tree. It's quite slow to start with, but then eventually will cause dieback within the tree. First in the foliage, then into the structure of the tree. We removed a windblown branch 3 years ago, I believe, and removed all of the dead wood from the canopy, which is exempt from, you're allowed to do under a TPO. That also helps the airflow through, so there's less wind sail in the tree, makes it safer. Going back now, I'd say there's probably 15% of the overall canopy is dead wood again, so that's quite a lot of dieback in a short space of time. I was hesitant at the beginning to say it was Pseudococcus based on a few facts, that there's only finite nutrients in the soil due to the hard standing, the raised ground level at the back with 2 summer houses, and I'm not even sure there's any access to that nutrient for the tree. So things like lack of groundwater, finite resources that have been used up could have contributed to the needle drop. The biggest problem, could we go back to the other photos, please? Where the big buttress is next to the wall that's been rebuilt, I've excavated behind that, and there is it doesn't seem to undermine the wall. And if you look at the stem of the tree, it's called what's called a heliaxial adaptive growth. So you see a twist in the tree, and they're like ribs that go of new growth going round in a helix shape, and that would indicate that the tree is twisting like that from the prevailing wind coming up the River Trent. And because it's the ground's higher at the back, so it has an inability to get past the wall, it'll only follow paths of least resistance and water through the ground. So it creates a knocking as the tree twists. So I would suggest that that buttress is actually goes down and knocks the wall like that as the wind blows, rather than it undermining it and slowly lifting it. So they're the structural concerns. And on digging around, the ground's quite hollow on the root plate. I've got a sounding hammer that I detect for decay, but you sound the roots and it's very hollow sounding. You can see like a mycelial, see mycelium in the, just there, that's it, in the root, which may or may not be, is legally you can't really say unless you really had it tested, but you'd suspect certain fungal pathogens would indicate that. I believe the tree would have been planted as a smaller tree, maybe a little bit, but not much younger than the house. And where it looks like a bike stand, but that would have been a gate into another garden, so it would have been in a containerized area.
30 seconds.
Yeah, so the ground being higher at the back would indicate that it was probably a containerized tree and has not had the best outlook. And I think planting newer trees would be a long term, would make up for the removal of that tree long term. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I invite Councillor Phillips when you're ready.
Before I start my 5 minutes, can I just ask the scorecard for the tree, was that in the original documents? Because I don't recall seeing that.
No, it's in the late representations.
Okay, was everybody sent that? Because I wasn't.
Don't know.
Should I have been?
It's sent to committee members and published on the website.
Okay, but as a speaker, then I'm not entitled to see that before the meeting. I have to keep checking the website. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know what the protocol is in respect of that, but I can tell you that the committee members were sent it and it was published on the website.
Okay, I'm somewhat surprised that this application to fell a perfectly healthy, mature tree was given the support of the planning department. I know the tree in question well, as will many people who frequent the area. It forms a very prominent fixture on the skyline that many have had the pleasure to enjoy. Thankfully, the TPO on this tree was put on in 1994, and I think it is fair to say if it hadn't been, the tree may not have been here today. I say this as at the back of the car park for many years stood another perfectly healthy tree that didn't have a TPO on it, and it went missing sometime between August 2020 and April 2022, if Street View is to be believed. The stump, now well overgrown, is clearly visible today in my photo on the screen. That's where I am now. Right, but back to the application in question. If this application is approved tonight, the applicant would have to plant 2 new trees at the rear of the car park for the felling of the cedar tree. The new trees would take 10 plus years to establish and grow, and there is no guarantee they will survive. The landscape officer for the council says the felling of the TPO cedar would result in a public loss of amenity for 10 years plus. He also says this is an application he is torn on. He says there is no foreseeable risk of the tree falling. The circumference of the tree is getting on for 3 meters. We need no reminder of the importance of trees such as this fine specimen plays. The junction of Wilford Lane and Loughborough Road is an area of poor air quality. The last thing we want to be doing is removing healthy trees that filter and purify the air we breathe. Unless your name is Donald Trump, you're all aware of global warming and climate change. So let's not be too hasty in hacking down perfectly healthy trees. Heat waves are here to stay, and the tree gives shade to the area. Some comments of support to the felling of the tree are mainly around bird droppings. Birds tend to hang out in trees, so it's not a justifiable reason to fell the tree. One comment refers to sustaining £1,500 worth of suspension damage to her car. I visited the site, and the entrance to the property is by means of a sharp turn off the busy Wilford Lane. The drive to the car park by the property building is approximately 10 metres long and quite narrow. Where the tree is located, the drive widens to double the width of the narrow section of the drive and has a parking space parallel to the wall by the tree. There is plenty of space for a vehicle to pass, keeping well clear of the tree in the process. The report mentions there is some lifting of tarmac of approximately 20 centimetres, but the location of this is right up to the base of the tree. If a vehicle was to drive this close to the tree, they would likely take off their mirror in the process. The tree shows no signs of being clipped by a vehicle. You would not expect any vehicle to be moving faster than 5 miles per hour on this vehicle accessible parts of the property. It has a small car park and no designated footways from the car park to the building. On my visits and observations, I did not notice any bird droppings other than one dropping on the wheeled bin. I don't believe the area has been swept, as there are still leaf debris near to the tree. As the wall section gets a mention in the comments of support, I would like to point out that the wall has brick buttresses supports along the whole length. These buttresses are equally spaced at just a few meters apart. From the comments, the main issues seem to be around bird droppings. Rather than an application to fell a fine tree, an application for a canopy where the wheeled bins are kept, and a couple more for the car parking spaces nearest the tree might have been a more sympathetic approach to the bird dropping issues. I ask committee members to debate this application sympathetically and to be the voice of the tree and all the wildlife that live in it and from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Mr. Bate, do you have any points of clarification?
The only point of clarification would be in respect of the comments on bird droppings. There were public comments about bird droppings, but as per the report at paragraph 27, no significant weight is given to those issues in the recommendation. Bird droppings haven't weighed heavily into the recommendation, which is to grant consent for the felling of the tree, subject to the condition of the 2 replacements being planted. And that as well would be subject to 5 years of any replacement planting that fails or is removed itself being replaced. The council's tree officer has also suggested that those 5 years would give opportunity to serve TPOs on the replacement trees, such that should they fail after the 5 years, there would still be an expectation of them being replaced.
Thank you. So it falls to us now to discuss and decide. Councillor Birch, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got some questions regarding the health of the tree. So obviously the council's position is that it's a healthy tree, and yet we've had a testimony today suspecting that there's fungal pathogen and other issues with the tree. I don't doubt for a second the gentleman's credentials, but we do have a conflict there. Have we as a council inspected the tree to a detailed level? What is the position of this council on the health of that tree, please?
So my understanding is that that is new information. The senior landscape and design officer, Mr. Pettit, did visit site, did look at the tree. He wasn't aware at that time of the mycelial growth that's been shown on that one image, and didn't indicate that he observed signs of pathogen deterioration of the tree. But as the gentleman pointed out, that's something that only in recent time as those signs become more clear and apparent. So it may well be that when Tom visited, there was less to see.
So thank you. So to my mind, until there is evidence from this council, from council affiliated experts, then I'm going to go with what the council says, which is that it's a healthy tree. And I'm sympathetic to the applicant, but I think the impact on the skyline will be immense, and I think it would be an absolute shame to take it down. That's where I am at the minute, but obviously see what the members say.
Councillor Calvert, please.
Yeah, I'd like just to carry on with that conversation, and we've got the slides up there, and if we can just march through the ones that were shown after this. So looking at those at the moment, we've got the tree and the top 2 slides, and it looks a lovely conical shape, majestic really. But the next slide I think shows views from over the bridge. Right, we're over on that side. Now that view, as you walk along the path from the bridge heading westward, if you go past the Carlton Stone development, there's another cedar tree beyond, and that 2 trees together, they complement each other, and it's a fantastic view. Now this is an area where during COVID it was like a march of the thousands. It's such a lovely walk going along bottom end on the Rushcliffe side, and then over the toll bridge and back again. And it's used all the time at the weekends. It's fairly quiet. There's many joggers during the week, but it has a lot of people passing through, and it is, to me, it makes me have a question the scoring that we have in the score sheet. I mean, all this is subjective, and I'm not trying to doubt the validity of what the senior landscape officer has been saying, but in box 2, there's the very severe adverse impact if you remove the tree, or just severe adverse impact. And reading the bit that gives you a score of 4, it says large trees in prominent locations visible from wide area or distance. That, I would say, matches what we have on the view from the Nottingham side to the Rushcliffe side. I can't say whether it screens on sightly structures, because I could only do that if you remove the tree. So I would suggest that there's a very strong argument for that score being a 4, which then takes you to 11, and then that would pass it for a TPO. So I suppose what I'm saying is the whole thing is a very fine line on it, and I would suggest that it's probably within the score where it would deserve a TPO. So I'm minded currently, but waiting for more discussion, to suggest that we shouldn't accept the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Matthews?
A quick question, if I may. Do we know why this tree was given a preservation order in the first place 30 years ago? Because presumably at that point it was significantly smaller than it is at the moment. Thank you.
I don't believe the TPO information that's on file records why it was protected. We've got the TPO documentation from the 1990s, but not the report that assessed why.
Thank you. Just looking at the photos, there are quite a number of trees in that vicinity. I do have some sympathy with the owners in terms of the damage and the state of the tree, and I think it's fairly balanced by suggesting that they're wanting to plant 2 new trees to replace, which would actually screen the building considerably more than the current tree. The current tree doesn't screen the building at all, simply pokes up above the skyline, which, whilst does add to the skyline, I perfectly accept that. The new trees that are proposed would provide more screening and equally eventually poke up through the skyline. So I think with the provisions that have been suggested of potentially putting new trees in with preservation orders on them in due course would protect that skyline for the future, not just for the next few years until that tree becomes fully diseased. I don't have any reason to doubt the arborist's qualifications or viewpoint, and it seems a sensible longer term plan to preserve that view from the riverside. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barney?
Yeah, thank you. So I was minded also to ask about the new health information that's been presented this evening, but I think you've answered the question. And I would say also, having worked with Tom Pettit over a few years now and had his involvement in things, I think I would trust his judgment at this stage of whether there were further health issues we should be concerned about. I'd also say that's a walk that I've done many times, my years on the county council, escaping the stress of council meetings and walking from County Hall along that bridge and back then around back up to the road bridge is remarkable. It's one of Nottingham's most iconic walks, and that tree is a tree that I've admired. I also don't really say, I appreciate that the other speakers are showing empathy for the owner of the property there. To my mind, it enhances the property enormously. I think it's and it beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but I think that beautiful tree makes that beautiful property even more beautiful. So I think the shading aspects as well, particularly with the heat we're facing and the weathering, there's benefits. So it all depends on how you view it. If it was my tree, I'd be proud to have it in my garden and I would want to protect it and keep it. So to that end, to me, this is not ambiguous at all. I think we should protect the tree, and I'm glad that it's been brought to this committee so that we've got the attention of folks on it. Should anything untoward happen to it in the future, we'll all be mindful of this very day. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis, please.
Thank you, Chair. I pretty much support everything that Councillor Matthews said. In my experience since being on the planning committee, I've found Tom to be a tree lover, the last person who would agree to cut a tree down unnecessarily, and I am therefore minded to go with his judgment on this.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, please.
Thank you. I too, so if you take the tree out and look at it, it's a beautiful tree. It's a lovely shape. But I think what struck me most was at the beginning of the presentation, it was pointed out that years ago when this was planted, actually we haven't always put trees in the right place for the future. And I think that's really quite important to remember, because we do as a committee get a few trees here that are beautiful trees but in the wrong place, and I feel that that is one of the trees. I take on board that has been said by the first gentleman who said about the needles and about all the needles coming off, and that there is an issue there. I also understand that some trees just have an end of life, and perhaps this has actually got to the end of its life if branches are going to fall off it. I personally wouldn't like to walk underneath it every day, and I at my own house have a similar tree, and we have to be very careful with it, and we're having somebody come to have a look at it. So going back to the fact that it is a beautiful tree in the wrong place, and if you could pick it up and put it somewhere else, that would be the ideal. But I agree with the officer's recommendation, I'm afraid, that something will have to be done with it, and it has to be done within the next 2 years here. I'm so sorry, I've switched it off. So yes, I support the recommendation. Thank you.
It's not the tree calling, is it, Debbie?
No, I'm so sorry. It's my son, and he is in local government, so he should know. I told him.
Thank you for that. I don't think we've necessarily heard anything that indicates a strong belief that the tree is nearing the end of its life. I think the point is more about whether or not it's outgrown its position. Perhaps might be a different phrase, and I suspect nobody here is finding this particular. Well, I think Councillor Barney said he's finding it easy, but I get the sense that others are finding it less straightforward. So my mind goes to the test, if you like, of what we've been of that we need to apply. And I have to be sort of corrected if I'm wrong, but I understand that to be a balancing exercise, essentially, between on one side the health and the safety of the tree, and on the other side the benefits of the public immunity. Is that a fair description of the test?
It is. One of the points that Councillor Mason mentioned was a view that this isn't necessarily the right tree in the right place. That is a phrase that crops up in our policy, talking about encouraging and protecting trees where they are the right tree in the right place. Cedar trees, because of their inherent tendency to shed limbs, aren't generally considered to be the ideal species of tree to plant in urban and suburban areas, particularly in spaces where there is traffic and pedestrians. It probably isn't the species of tree that a landscaper would suggest as being sensible to plant in this location. So that is worth considering. I'm mindful of the mixed views in the room. It is perhaps worth pointing out, and it is mentioned in the report, that where there is sort of risk of damage or loss arising from a tree where we refuse a permission, there is a potential for compensation claims being made against the council for the 12 months following that decision. So that is just something that I want to make sure councillors are aware of when making their decisions.
And I think one of the things that makes, I appreciate Councillor Burton's, one of the things that to my mind makes this balancing exercise hard is I think it's agreed that the public amenity benefits on one side of the scale are very high. And therefore, goes without saying on the balancing exercise that the health and safety issues need to be at least as high to outweigh them. Councillor Birch.
Thank you. Yeah, 2 points. In terms of the immunity, and again, you're absolutely right to point out that test and us to be cognizant of it. To my mind, this tree is on private lands that affects the users of that car park. In terms of amenity value, as Councillor Barney says, there's, I don't know how many people walk that route, but it's probably in thousands on a daily basis. It's a very, very well walked route, and it does add to the amenity of that route and to the skyline, etc. In terms of the point about liability, which the officer made, I take that point, and obviously we have to be mindful of that. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have the report in front of me right here, but did it not say that the applicant hadn't done any work on the tree in terms of trimming, etc., for 20 years? And if there were concerns about the branches dropping, etc., would that not have been something they would have done?
So there was pruning undertaken around 10 years ago, 2016. I think there were some branches reduced, overhanging the roof of the building. Clearly the tree has sort of grown back and overhangs the building again. And the applicant's agent also mentioned work of crown cleaning, removing dead wood. That's not something that we have a paper trail of in terms of applications, but it is work that would be exempt from the requirement to obtain consent. So I've got no reason to doubt what we've been told. It would be routine maintenance and an application wouldn't be required to remove dead wood from the canopy. The issue with cedars is that they tend to have the majority of their foliage on the outer limits of their canopy. So there's a limit to how much you can prune them back, a bit like conifer trees. If you prune them back too heavily, you just expose a lot of bare wood and it tends to then not recover from that pruning. So there is a limit to how heavily a cedar tree could be pruned. And because they tend to drop limbs at random, there's a limit to how easily you could identify a particular limb as being one that you might want to remove preemptively. Yeah.
Councillor Way, please.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the evaluation report on here and health and safety, which I appreciate is a really important point, but it's been given a score of 2 because trees overhang or dominate properties or roads where there's high public use or car parking throughout the day. I've got the impression this is on private property, so there can't be a huge amount of public coming and going underneath it. And from the pictures you showed, the car parking is well beyond the tree. It's not under the tree. Admittedly, you have to drive under the tree to get there. I take everything that Mr. Bates said about can't really tell what's going to happen to it. One thing, a suggestion really, is that we're going to lose a huge element of the skyline if this is taken down. And there's a promise to plant some more trees to replace it. And then there's the proviso that it'll take 10 years before they replace it on the landscape, on the skyscape. So is there a possibility that those 2 new trees could be planted in advance, so that when this tree does reach the end of its life, those trees have already grown to a significant height? Because it appears on the diagram or on the photograph that they won't be taking up parking spaces, which would be irrelevant anyway, because this tree we're talking about is not in a parking space. So maybe the applicants could consider that, planting trees, extra trees sooner, and maybe preserving this one for a little longer, so that we don't lose the skyline.
So there would be a limit to the practicality of how you could require replacement trees to be planted significantly in advance. So if the application were refused, you wouldn't be able to condition anything. If the application were approved, that will likely be on the basis of the potential risk that retaining the tree poses. Ordinarily, grants of consent to protected trees have a 2-year life. So as with a planning application, where there's that 3-year commencement condition, it's 2 years for trees, and it's that the work be carried out, not simply commenced. So even if you could craft an approval that required planting in advance, that planting couldn't realistically be much more than 18 months in advance, because you've got the lifetime of the permission to play with. There would be the condition that is drafted on the recommendation seeks to secure details of the size of the replacement trees. So we've got the number, we've got the species, we've got the location. What we don't currently have is an indication as to what size or maturity of tree would be planted. If we granted consent today and had a condition seeking to try and require planting in advance, we would have to build in some time to get and agree that information on maturity. Trees ideally, and unless they are fairly substantial, the greater chance of survival is if they're planted in the sort of winter planting season. And again, because we're in the middle of summer, that's 5-6 months away. That the most you could do is sort of 12-18 months in advance, and given the potential risks to the tree, and it's possible that during that time, if there is concern increasingly that the tree is more of a risk, a further application could be submitted to seek to fell it more promptly. So that there is potentially something we could do there. I think the condition would need to be carefully worded, and we couldn't require it 5 years in advance.
Councillor Way.
I appreciate the difficulty of making conditions. I suppose what I'm trying to do is to appeal to the good nature of the applicant.
Noted. Thank you. Councillor Chaplin.
Yeah, so I am finding this difficult, because I agree that it seems to be a tree that's in the wrong place, but I also agree that it does add an awful lot to that view. Presumably the applicant, the tree was there when they took over the property, so they knew it was there. I don't always have sympathy with that. It's not always, well, you knew what you were doing when you moved there, but in this case, that tree is there. It's an iconic tree. They don't seem to have made much effort to alleviate any problems. Like you say, they haven't put in a canopy or anything. So yeah, I'm finding it difficult, but I would mourn the loss of it. And I think it is important that we have big trees giving out shade, dealing with the air pollution. So I'm leaning that way at the moment.
Councillor Calvert.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. The first one is this actually the right time to be giving this tree the death sentence? It just feels to me premature. Thinking about age and health, we've got a bit of a debate as to whether it is that poorly, and I come down on the thought that it's still got plenty more years life and providing all the benefits to the local community. The second question is the replacement and what's being proposed, and I find it hard to believe that the two beech trees could match even in 20 or 30 years time the beauty of what we've got currently. So altogether I feel that this is the wrong time to be making a decision to fell it.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Matthews and then Councillor Birch.
Thank you. Just to come back on that point, I have quite a number of very large beech trees in my own garden that I've had to prune back, and they are excessively tall, and they do spread, and they are very large trees. And again, if we've got our own officers of the council here, our own people that are experts in this field that are saying if this was looked at today, they would not be putting a preservation order on this tree. We've heard from the applicant's agent about the health of the tree and their concerns, which I think is valid. I've got no reason to doubt that that's valid. Looking at the matrix, I said, yes, it is a large tree. There are lots and lots of large trees in that vicinity. They are replacing them with trees that will grow very large. And I can testify to that because I've got 6 of them across the back of my garden. And for me, that's a fairly reasonable approach that the applicant is taking. Our own officers are telling us that in that 5-year period, they can then look at putting on tree preservation orders to ensure that those trees become iconic and form part of that skyline. And I think for me, I have to balance this with the benefit that that then brings compared to the detriment that the business and the owners are suffering with the tree in its present condition. And it is a finely balanced judgment. And I think for me, if our own officers are telling us that this would not warrant a tree preservation order today, looking at that skyline on the pictures we've got here and knowing how big those trees grow and how quickly those trees grow, I think that's a very reasonable proposition that will actually future-proof this moving forward. So whilst I do get the concerns raised by other members, I think they are over thinking the single tree issue here. That's just my view. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Birch.
Thank you. Just a few things, and they're absolutely reasonable points, and obviously quite entitled to your point of view, and that's very, very reasonable. I've got a couple of questions in that regard for the officer. So the beech trees that are prospectively going to be planted, what is the growth timescales of those? So in other words, how long would the skyline be in a detrimental position relative to today? Will it be 10 years? Will it be 30 years? Will it be whatever? To Councillor Matthews' points about the applicant, what I would say is, and again, I'm not saying anything about the gentleman that spoke in any way, but he is in the employ of the applicant. So with regards to the health of the tree, I'm going on what the council said. And I would just like to raise a point for the chair. Obviously, we've got a member who's arrived late through no fault of her own today. Obviously, she cannot participate and vote, but is there, in the same way, if somebody was ill in a meeting, the other side might perhaps, as a courtesy, step down? Is there any convention or mechanism for that? If you see where I'm coming from, because I'm, as a Green member, I don't want to preempt what she would have voted.
I think I can preempt what Councillor Mallender is going to do at the end of this item, which is abstain upon it. Yeah. To answer your question.
Yeah, my question was, we know she's going to have to abstain. My question is, as a matter of fairness, judging by the feeling in the room, I think had she been able to vote, I think it may be going one way based on what members have said. That was my question. It was a procedural question and a constitutional question, I guess.
Sorry, I don't think I understand. Has it been answered, or do you need?
No, so you know when somebody's ill in a meeting.
I think I might.
I might have been able to get a substitute had I known in advance, but unfortunately it wasn't something that 53 children needed their hot chocolate and their campfire. I'm sorry.
Right, okay. Councillor, you've got a question? Right, okay. Right, Mr. Bates going to respond to Councillor Birchall's first point, and then we'll go to Councillor Ellis.
Yeah, so it's just on the question of how long it would take the replacement trees to grow and sort of replicate a contribution to amenity. Tom's comments, his view is that 10 years would be the amount of time it would take for those replacement trees to replace the amenity value of this tree.
Did we have an expected height approximately of what they would grow to, for example?
No, that information is not in there, and I don't know.
Okay, Councillor Ellis, please.
Thanks, Chair. I was actually going to say that we cannot change the rules of the game, and it's not about fairness. But Councillor Birch has withdrawn that suggestion, so I won't pursue it.
Okay, are there any, nobody else is indicating to speak. I don't know whether there are any other questions or comments. Councillor Mason? No.
I would like to put forward the proposal that I will support the recommendation that the officers have proposed.
Okay, very good. So, of course.
Thank you. When I was talking at the beginning, I was talking about the particularly good views, and unfortunately, the one view that I thought was by far the most impressive was the complementary two cedars, one off the slide, the tree that we're talking about. Just expressing my disappointment that you didn't catch that. It's beyond the right-hand edge. That's the beginning of the McCarthy and Stone building. It carries on. And then at the other end of it, there's another conical shape cedar, and the two just seem to work well together.
Is that captured on any of the other photos you want to be shown, or just, you know, okay. Okay, very good. Right, so anybody else wants to, we've had this proposal proposed and seconded. Does anybody want to say anything before we vote on that? So for the avoidance of doubt, we've had the proposal to support the recommendation in the report, which is to grant consent for felling of the tree, proposed by Councillor Mason and seconded by Councillor Ellis. Can I ask all those in favour of that to indicate, please? And those against? Abstentions? 2. The motion's fallen. Okay, so the motion has fallen. We'll therefore need to put forward an alternative recommendation. You have me to pass over to you. So just bear with us a moment. Okay, very good. So with that proposal having fallen, we're going to need to make a alternative recommendations. Obviously, been a number of things that we've been discussing about that. What I'm going to suggest is that though that recommendation is going to be that consent to fell the tree is not granted, and we need to be clear on our reasons for that. I thought I would set out some basic reasons and then see if other people either want to add anything or support that. So that with bearing in mind that the assessment here is a question of balancing the health and safety matters or concerns in relation to the tree against the public amenity benefit. The public amenity benefit is considered by us to be significant and making a large positive contribution to the local area and riverside setting, which on balance is not outweighed by the health and safety concerns of the tree at this time. Councillor Birch.
Assuming that's a proposal, I will second that motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, just clarifying the motion that's being put forward and the reason for refusal, which I've just jotted down. If I can just read that out, if that's okay. So the tree is considered to have a significant public amenity value, makes positive contribution to the character appearance of the surrounding area and riverside setting. And this is not outweighed by evidence regarding the health and safety risk of the tree, which is in apparent good health. And then every reason needs sort of a policy attached to that. And policy 37 of our local plan part 2 is the relevant policy, which is therefore the proposal would be contrary to, wording along those lines.
Very good. So that has been proposed by me by me and seconded by Councillor Ellis, and ask all those. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Beg your pardon. It's because I was looking down here where I'd written it down before, so forgive me. One of many mistakes of the evening, no doubt. Seconded by Councillor Birch, and I ask all those in favour of that recommendation to indicate, please. Those against? Happy. And any abstentions? Thank you. Very good. There's some musical chairs going to happen here. I'm conscious of bearing in mind, particularly bearing in mind the heat today, that a number of us have been diligently taking on significant amount of fluids and the inevitable impact of that. So we'll just have a 5-minute adjournment. Thank you. Right, I haven't got a gavel, but I am going to call you to order, please. Well, thank you. And we'll move on now to the second item on our agenda, which relates to 75 Boundary Road in West Bridgford. And hand over to Ms. Baxter, please.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to the ground floor of 75 Boundary Road, West Bridgford, which is one of the units within the Boundary Road shops that are identified as a centre of neighbourhood importance. Just run through some of the photographs for members that aren't aware of the area. So the application site is on the right-hand side of the pair of semis there, highlighted. And this is Ralph Close with number 1 Ralph Close just being highlighted. Number 1 Ralph Close again. And then a picture showing the relationship between number 1 Ralph Close and the application site, which is just on the left-hand side of the photograph. Thank you. Again, going back to the main road with Boundary Road to the left-hand side of the photograph, you've got the application site to the right, and then the parade of shops, which runs up on the left-hand side there. Again, the parade of shops. And then looking back down Boundary Road towards where the application site actually is in Ralph Close. So members might note from the photographs that the premises are currently empty, but they have previously been occupied by a newsagent and more recently a bike store. The proposal before you seeks the change of use of the ground floor unit from retail, which is a Class E use, to a hot food takeaway, which is a sui generis use. The only external change that is under consideration is the addition of flu extract, which would be located at the rear of the premises, which is just being highlighted now. Thank you. Matters relating to the character of the area and BNG can be found in the committee report at paragraphs 36 to 41 and 60 to 63. And whilst I don't propose to repeat those matters, should members have any questions regarding these elements, I'm happy to answer your queries. The focus of the presentation will be on the matters that relate to the principle of the development, impacts on residential amenity, and impacts on highways. So turning to the first point, as per the committee report at paragraphs 27 to 35, officers consider that the principle of development is acceptable and accords with policy 26 of the local plan part 2 and also paragraph 97 of the NPPF. While the site is located within walking distance of 2 primary schools, Rushcliffe Academy and also West Bridgford School, and the Boundary Road play area, the site is located within a designated centre as identified by policy 26. The test in paragraph 97 of the NPPF is whether the site is within a town centre. The definition of a town centre is set out within the glossary of the NPPF, and given that the site is within the designated centre set out in our policy, and the NPPF glossary definition of town centres includes areas that are defined on the local authority's policies maps, such as centres like these, it is considered that the site falls within the NPPF definition of a town centre, and therefore the proposal would not be contrary to that particular paragraph. In addition, policy 26 of the local plan part 2 sets out that fast food takeaways are suitable in such centres, subject to meeting relevant criteria. So when taking into account the number of hot food takeaways that have been approved in that location, along with this particular proposal, the number of hot food takeaways within the defined centre would fall within the prescribed limitations of 30%. Therefore, officers consider that the principle of development is actually acceptable in this case. In respect of amenity of neighbouring properties, consideration has been had to the potential of noise and odour as set out in the committee report at paragraphs 42 to 52. And environmental health have raised no objection to the proposal. In respect of the external flue, this is proposed on the rear of the property, would be in close proximity to adjoining flats and approximately 16 metres from the wall of the side elevation of number 1 Ralph Close. but subject to the inclusion of conditions 5 and 6, which relate to the provision of noise levels, details of the system. It is considered that potential impacts of noise and odour from the equipment can be fully understood, assessed and approved at an acceptable level, and that the fumes and odour can be suitably controlled so as not to result in significant impacts, thereby complying with the local plan policies. Regarding other amenity impacts, the premises are proposed to be open until 11 p.m. Monday to Sunday, where noise could arise from deliveries, staff, visitors and vehicle movements. Currently, the premises are not restricted in terms of its opening hours or in respect of its deliveries. In respect of the current application, conditions are proposed to limit the opening times and delivery times so as to reduce such impacts on residential amenity. The current use class of the premises, as I said before, is E, which is commercial and business, and other users could occupy the premises without requiring planning permission. Such uses could include cafe or restaurant, which could also result in similar staff, visitor, extract equipment and vehicle movement to that of the proposed use. The application site is within a centre of neighbourhood importance where such uses are expected, and it's considered that the proposed takeaway use would not give rise to significant adverse impacts compared to other uses that could also operate from the premises. Therefore, it's considered subject to the recommended conditions, the proposal would not result in significant or unacceptable impacts on the amenity of nearby occupiers. In respect of parking and highway matters and servicing, there is an informal area that wraps around the frontage of the premises. And again, the County Council Highways Officer has raised no objection in respect to parking, traffic or highway safety. They consider that it's unlikely to result in material changes to the existing situation. And they note that similar demands could arise from other uses that wouldn't require planning permission. They consider that the servicing needs would likely remain as existing. Again, the officers consider that the proposal is policy compliant in this regard. So to conclude, the proposed change of use from retail to a hot food takeaway and the addition of an extract flue is considered to be policy compliant and is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions outlined within the committee report.
Thank you. And again, we have two speakers registered to address us. The first of those is Mr. Cook, please. Please take your time, and I think you were watching for the first application, so but I'll just repeat, take your time. When you're ready, the button on the right hand side will make things go red. Off you go, and with 30 seconds to go, we will we'll let you know.
Good evening. I'm representing the residents of the 8 properties in Ralph Close and 77 Boundary Road. We all strongly object to the application. I have 3 topics to cover. Firstly, proximity to the neighbouring residential properties. The application location is situated on the end of a parade of shops immediately adjacent to Ralph Close and directly opposite 77 Boundary Road. There is only a distance of 15 metres between the planned extraction flue and 1 Ralph Close, and 24 metres between the front of the shop and 77 Boundary Road. This will have a significant adverse impact on the amenity of these nearby residents, caused by noise and cooking odours emitted by the extraction flue and the decrease in number of vehicle movements from delivery drivers, customers and the associated noise. In the medium and long term, the effectiveness of any mitigation measures for the extraction flue are only going to be as good as the ongoing maintenance. There is no mitigation for the nuisance caused by the increased number of vehicle movements. Secondly, the specific circumstances of Ralph Close, which is adjacent to the application location. The road of Ralph Close is unusually narrow at 4.5 metres because the highway is an extension of what was previously a farm field entrance and terminates as a cul-de-sac. In contrast, Willow Road at the other end of Boundary Road shops is a standard width through road at 7.5 metres. Because of the narrow width and short nature of Ralph Close, it easily becomes congested and gridlocked with only a small number of vehicles using the cul-de-sac to turn around after visiting the parade of shops. This is before considering the negative impact of regular trespass of vehicles onto private driveways and double parking adjacent to the shops. This double parking already has a negative impact on the residential amenity at 77 Boundary Road because the constant presence of parked cars on the pavement opposite the property driveway prevents access and egress. The proposed change in use will only make this situation worse. Finally, I'd like to talk about the application in relation to the National Planning Policy Framework, specifically Section 8, paragraph 97. This paragraph instructs local planning authorities to refuse applications for hot food takeaways within walking distance of schools and other places where children and young people congregate. The only exception to this is where the application location is within a designated town centre. Clearly, the Boundary Road shops cannot be considered a town centre, and they are within walking distance of 4 local schools and Boundary Road Park. Therefore, an application for a hot food takeaway in this location should be refused. However, the committee court report misrepresents the Rushcliffe local plan to support a recommendation to approve. I'll explain how and why this is wrong. The committee report briefly covers this topic in paragraphs 33, 34 and 35. Paragraph 33 simply quotes Section 8, paragraph 97 from the National Planning Policy Framework. Paragraph 34 of the committee report confirms that the application location is within walking distance of several schools and within the Boundary Road centre of neighbourhood importance. Paragraphs 34 and 35 then conclude that the application is acceptable based on 2 factors. Firstly, precedents established by successful application granted in January 2026 for the conversion of a double garage in the Boundary Road centre of neighbourhood importance to a dessert shop, including hot food. Secondly, that proposed use of the hot food takeaway is considered acceptable by Policy 26 of the Rushcliffe Local Plan Part 2. What is not explained by the committee report is how Policy 26 of the Rushcliffe Local Plan Part 2 overrides the instruction in the National Planning Policy Framework that applications for hot food takeaways within walking distance of schools should be refused. To understand how the national policy should be applied to this application, we need to look at the Rushcliffe Local Plan and the hierarchy of retail centres. The Rushcliffe Local Plan Part 1 establishes a hierarchy of 3 levels of retail centre. District centres, such as the area Central Avenue, West Bridgford, local centres, such as Eastleigh Village, and finally centres of neighbourhood importance, such as the Boundary Road shops under consideration today. Policy 25 of the Rushcliffe Local Plan Part 2 deals with district and local centres, and in paragraph 1 establishes that main centre retail uses will be permitted in these locations. This creates an equivalence between district and local centres in the local plan
30 seconds.
And designated town centres in the National Planning Policy Framework. Consequently, an application for hot food takeaway in the we have to skip. In contrast to Policy 25, Policy 26 does not create an equivalence between centres of neighbourhood importance in the local plan. The statement permitting, this is because the statement permitting main town centre retail use is absent.
That's your time. Sorry.
That's that time up. Okay. We have this written down so we can distribute.
Councillor Della, please.
Hello. Could I have a picture with the front of the shops on? That's it. Yeah.
And you know the drill, I think. So when you're ready, we're ready.
Okay, thank you. I'm objecting to this planning application on the basis that it does not meet the criteria to improve the area. Instead, it will damage the social and environmental conditions for the local residents. Boundary Road shops are a quiet parade of shops. This is currently a quiet residential area and this outlet would change that. My concerns are both safety and the impact on the immediate neighbours on Ralph Close and Boundary Road. Placing a fast food outlet here is placing this shop at the top of a very narrow cul-de-sac, and you wouldn't ordinarily do that. Now, parking here is very limited. I don't know if you can see from that picture, but that space, the frontage is effectively only 2 cars wide. And cars come in from either side. They come in from the Ralph Close side, that's the one on the far right of the picture there, and they come in from the other side. And depending which side they come in from, they tend to park. So you often get people parking one side or the other side, or sometimes both sides. When I went past the other night, it was completely blocked up with people parking, coming in from both sides. And this proposal will add further traffic to that problem, and it'll add e-bikes and e-scooters, as food delivery services will also use a hot food takeaway place. And as you can see, there's no access on foot. There's no pavement, there's no route that doesn't involve threading through the traffic to get to the door. And that increases the risk for pedestrians, particularly children, wheelchair users and parents with pushchairs. At the moment, the dessert shop isn't functioning, so we don't know how much extra traffic that's going to bring into the area. But what will happen, and what's already happening, and that's what my concern is, that Ralph Close will bear the brunt of this. What happens is when the car park gets over full, people start parking on Ralph Close. Those people come in to Ralph Close to get into the area, see that this area in front is busy, and so decide they're going to stay on Ralph Close and park up there. Those coming in from the other side, if they can't get parked, will pull through and again come out on Ralph Close and park there. And that is something, as a resident that uses the area regularly, I've seen regularly, and that is before any other units put there. It was all right when it was a sort of a day use unit with not a lot of cars attached, but to have a busy takeaway with people coming and going, picking up things, it will add to that problem. Ralph Close itself is a narrow access point, and the cars park on the pavements already, which makes it very difficult for residents to get down the road, for emergency vehicles to get down the road, for bin lorries to get round the road. And it also means that if the Aunt Letters proposed stays open till 11 o'clock at night, the residents will be getting that noise of car doors, people talking outside the fast food place, directly outside the houses. It's not like on Loughborough Road with shops there, because they've got a pub, they've got Asda, they've got the bus stop, they've got a lot of football. But here at that time of night, it's quiet. There's not a lot going on, and this would change that dramatically. There's also, as you can see, a zebra there, and there's double yellow lines all the way from Loughborough Road. So it's not like people can park on the main road. Even if it was safe, they can't. So the only parking is that immediate area. And because the 2 access points, that's the thing that causes the problems of traffic jam in there, or people parking on Ralph Close. It wouldn't be problematic to fill this shop with a different sort of unit. There's a lot of people wanting units in West Bridgford, and I think they could easily find someone else to take this shop. The other mark that's in the report is that there is a bin there. There is a bin, but as you can see, I think it's behind that van. It's not easily accessible. It's not on walking route, and anybody in a car wouldn't use it because it's behind a wall. And there's no buses that go there. So this is a small parade of shops that's been designated as neighbourhood centre of importance, but it's too small and has too little parking to support a hot food outlet. There's already considerable parking problems, and this would add a lot of disturbance to those people nearby. This outlet would therefore have significant adverse impact on the immediacy of nearby residents, and so this proposal doesn't meet the social and environmental conditions required to approve this application.
Is there any points of clarification rising from that? No. Okay. So before, as we move on to the phase now for us to discuss, debate, etc., this strikes me as one of those applications where I think it will be helpful for us to take a themed approach and go through them one by one before moving on to the kind of next area or theme. So where should we start? Councillor Birch.
Thank you. I want to start with the centre of neighbourhood importance point in the town centre definition. My understanding is that in the local plan and in planning law, the town centre is not the phrase that we use in everyday parlance. It is a planning term and is clearly defined, and this meets that definition. I just want some clarity on that. Can we just confirm that in this context, town centre is correct, and that this borough has designated this as a town centre in the local plan?
I want to ask you to let us do the discussion now, please.
Thank you, Chair. So if I bring up onto the screen, we've just copied paragraph 97 from the MPPF, is set out above. And then in the MPPF, there's a glossary of terms, of which the town centre is defined there at the bottom of the screen. So as Andrea mentioned in the presentation, the definition of town centre is an area defined on the local authority's map, which includes centres occupied by main town centre uses. It is our view as officers that this being designated as a centre of neighbourhood importance in our local plan, and it's acceptable for town centre uses to be there, meets the definition of town centre as on the screen, and therefore the proposal for a hot food takeaway in this location wouldn't fall foul of paragraph 97, and that's the approach that we've taken on other applications in other centres of neighbourhood importance. And I know the gentleman talked about the other application and setting a precedent. That's the approach that we took on that application as well. So hopefully that's kind of answered that a little bit more for you.
Thank you. So,
Councillor Birch, do you have a follow-up question?
I do. So, to my mind, and I totally empathise with the speakers and the proximity to the school, but to me, sitting here right now, it seems cut and dried. The planning law is clear on this. It is a town centre in planning terms. The officers have just confirmed that, and the rules are the rules. So I'm finding it difficult to be persuaded against this at this stage. That was the crux of it for me, was this particular issue. But if we're being told this is a town centre in planning terms, then to my mind, there's no two ways about it.
Councillor Barney, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I was quite struck by the town centre aspect of the conversation. I thought the first speaker alluded to it very well when he mentioned Eastleigh. I've been thinking of this in context of Eastleigh, where I often frequent the takeaways, and thinking about the feeling and placing of them against those words town centre and the planning definition. I know this area very well. I'm grateful to the hire shop along that little stretch, which I visit probably every 6 months. And I have to say that I often face parking issues. And again, in the town centre, and this is in the daytime, usually probably in the morning, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, it's not easy to park in that particular location. In Eastleigh, I would not have those same problems. And yet just going to a hire shop, which does not have a lot of traffic, I have had on numerous occasions. So whilst the planning definition might define this as town centre, my feeling is it certainly doesn't feel like it. I will be picking up a Chinese takeaway this evening on my way home from Ed Walton, just down the way from here. And again, that's placed in what feels very much like a town centre. This doesn't. This feels to me like a residential area with a few shops placed around it. So I struggle. I accept the planning definition, but I struggle with it at a human level. My mind isn't made up on this application, unlike the last.
I think I would like to be sort of clear. Clearly, this is a really important aspect of the application, and I think I'd understood the various definitions within the local plan to be a hierarchy. And then, so really the question is, isn't it, is this in a town centre or not? And I think I've understood that the basis on which it's been judged to be within the town centre is clearly not, doesn't pass the eye test being in West Bridgford town centre, but at policy 26 of the local plan, where the centres of neighbourhood importance are listed, and I can note with interest, I suppose the question is, I presume it's not an accident that all of those centres of neighbourhood importance are within areas that are separately defined as towns, i.e. none of those areas, you know, if it was in Eastleigh, which I think is it still a village or is that the town, but if it was in Goatham, which clearly hasn't got a town centre, but would it be right to say that Goatham could not have a centre of neighbourhood importance because it hasn't got a town centre? Do you have to have a town centre to have a centre of neighbourhood importance, or is it an accident that our centres of neighbourhood importance also have town centres?
I think it's just the way that they've been designated and allocated when the policy was being sort of put together and made, and the reasons why those have been put as centres of neighbourhood importance at the time of the policy being put forward. Obviously, they have a collection of shops, and that's the reasons why. But in answer to your question, I don't know.
Councillor Way, then Councillor Matthews.
Thank you, Chair. I'm vaguely familiar with this area, and I think there's only about half a dozen shops along there. So doesn't it come under the bit that says exclude small parades of shops of purely neighbourhood significance? Discounting the fact that Councillor Barney likes to go there quite often. I used to go there to buy hockey boots for my daughter, but it's just, I don't see how it can be considered a town centre when it's just a small parade of shops, which is specifically excluded.
Thank you. Yeah, fully appreciate it says there excludes small parades of shops. It's our, as the officer's interpretation, that because the area is defined in our local plan part 2 as a centre of neighbourhood importance, where the town centre uses are acceptable, it hits the first sentence of that definition. If obviously these parades, these shops weren't defined or designated as a neighbourhood of importance, then our view is that that would then fall into a small parade of shops. But because it's designated, it's our view, obviously members may take a different approach, different view, a different interpretation of that, but the position that we're putting forward is that it's designated, and therefore it meets the definition of town centre as per that first part of that definition.
And to what extent should we be casting our minds to the second part of that definition, which is that so I think I've understood it. Tick, this area is defined in the local policies map as a centre of neighbourhood importance. The end of the sentence is within or adjacent to the primary shopping area. Is it considered that this is within or adjacent to the primary shopping area?
Well, I suppose it's designated on its own as a centre of neighbourhood importance. It's not, I wouldn't say it's next, within or adjacent to the primary shopping area, but because it's designated as a centre in our local plan, it's our view that that meets that definition in terms of that first part. If that makes sense, but I've seen more questions.
Sorry, Councillor Matthews was next in the queue. I recognise there's a number of other people.
Thank you, Chair. It's also an area I'm very familiar with. I use myself, like Councillor Barney. And I just wanted to address a few of the issues going through. Forget what the officers are saying about whether it's a designated part of a centre, but just dealing with some of the issues in terms of, I do have every sympathy with the residents there on Ralph Close, being the entrance is relatively narrow.
Sorry, Councillor Matthews, I'm going to interrupt if you don't mind, because the way that I think we're going on to talk about residential amenity or the traffic type things, is that right?
I was just trying to address the factors that have been brought up as I see them, and whether they are actually factors that we need to consider or not.
So if unless I've misunderstood, which if I haven't, what the sort of process I'd like to go through is try and get everything out there in relation to the principle. This first topic we're discussing, the principle and town centre uses, and then we'll come on to the other.
I've misunderstood.
Come on to the other bits afterwards. Okay, Councillor Mallender.
Well, I mean, I don't want to labour the point, but you know, I know this area not probably as well as some other people, but I have definitely been there, and under no circumstances would I describe it as a town centre. It is what it says there, a small parade of shops of purely neighbourhood significance. I cannot understand how it could possibly have any other designation other than a small parade of shops of purely neighbourhood significance. The shops that are there aren't shops that people rely upon in order to buy food or anything like that. They are specialist shops, generally speaking, I would say. And so they yeah, so I think it is a small parade of shops of purely neighbourhood significance. And I have lots of other points to make that I think similar later on. Thank you.
Councillor Birch.
Thank you, and I do want to labour the point because I really want to understand this, because in everyday parlance, yes, it's a small parade of shops, 100%. I would never describe that in everyday language as a town centre, but in planning terms, what I'm trying to get at is I do not understand the position at this time. That language is ambiguous to my mind, and I'm struggling to understand the meaning behind it. At the same time, obviously, we've got an applicant here who, you know, their livelihood is on this. You know, they're starting a business. You know, it's very important we get this right. Can we get some crystal clarity here on what that is saying? Because it seems to be contradicting itself. Perhaps a legal position or legal perspective. I do not understand how it can say one thing at the beginning and then later on say it excludes small parades of shops. I'm confused.
Thank you. So the definition is there for, obviously everyone's kind of read it a number of times. We've read it a number of times. It talks about areas defined on the local authorities policies map. So this is defined as a centre of neighbourhood importance, and we've got 8 or 9 different centres of neighbourhood importance. Obviously this is one of them. We've also got Rushcliffe Road and all over sort of the borough, including one in Keyworth as well. These are areas which are occupied by main town centre uses. Reference it, and then the next sentence talks about references to town centres or centres applied to city centres, town centres, district centres, local centres. And our view is, as officers, is because this is defined in our local plan as a centre, whether it's wording of centre of neighbourhood importance or district centre, local centre, because it's defined as that. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to have to interject. You have the right to be here and you've had the right to be heard. That right comes with a responsibility not to disrupt the rest of the proceedings. I'd ask you to remember that, please. I'd ask you to remember that and respect the process, and it's our turn to discuss and debate now.
Thank you. So yeah, our view is because it's a designated centre in the local plan, it hits that threshold of being a centre, whether it's a neighbourhood, district, local, whatever the wording might be, is because it's defined on the map. It has town centre uses. our view is that it's a town centre by this definition. Fully appreciate it says excluding small parades of shops, which on the face of it, it's a small parade of shops, absolutely. But because it's designated in our local plan, it's for that reason, which is why the officer's view is that it meets the definition. Members obviously welcome to interpret, view it as they choose.
Okay, thank you. So this is a legal definition. That's what I'm getting at. So this should be unambiguous. That's the problem. I think what members are saying, and very reasonably, they're saying the small parade of shops sentence negates the first bit. Is what you're saying the other way around, that the fact it's already been defined by a local plan, which this council has voted through and passed democratically, that then negates the small parades of shops bit? That's what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So it's because it's designated in the local plan. Yeah.
So for other members as well. So I think that means, from what you just said, that it's not a small parade of shops. It is a town centre as defined in how we need to define it. I agree. In everyday use, everyday language, it's not a town centre, but in planning terms, it is. Yes.
That's certainly the conclusion that the officers have reached. Councillor Calvert, please.
The same issue here. I think we can all agree that it's a small parade of shops, but then this bit about purely neighbourhood significance, from what I'm hearing, it's not that. It's actually of neighbourhood importance. Is that correct? That is the critical difference here. I would view it as being of purely neighbourhood significance, but am I right in thinking in planning terms it's neighbourhood importance?
I think I think we're all struggling with this, and remembering the definition here is the NPPF definition rather than local plan part 2. But as I have understood the logic, accepted it's a small parade of shops, and had it not been designated as a centre of neighbourhood importance by the local plan part 2, then it would be outside of the town centre, and the refusal would probably have been recommended on that basis. So as I've understood it to go, the logic all hangs on the definition of it as the centre of neighbourhood importance. Happy to be corrected. Yes, Councillor Amanda.
Could I just ask how many, as far as I can see, and as I say, I have been there, but not for a while. I think there are 4 shops. How many shops would there have to be in order for it not to be a town centre? 2? 1? I mean, what? I cannot understand how 4 shops, even if one of them is a convenience store, be considered to be a town centre. Sorry, I'm obviously I'm not. You know, this definition is just ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. So is there a limit to you know, is 1 shop possibly a town centre? Is 2 or is 4 the optimum number, or is it nothing to do with how many shops there are?
Well, my understanding, and I'm not sure that I'm going to say, but again, it comes back to the designation. So could one shop, if an area with 1 shop could be or had been defined as a centre of neighbourhood importance under the local plan, then yes, because it's the designation on which the view has been formed. I don't say that I'm necessarily supporting that. I'm just trying to. I understand there's a lot of this is hard to process. I'm struggling to get my head around it too. But Councillor Chaplin, then Councillor Barney.
It seems to me that the fact that we're having this discussion means that it's not a clear definition. Mr. Cullen explained that this was the officer's interpretation of it, which again makes it sound like it's not a clear definition, and therefore we can use this definition in the way that we think fits best. And I think we all agree that it's a small parade of shops, and depending how strongly we feel about having a hot food takeaway walking distance from schools, we can use that to maybe influence how we read this, because it's not a clear definition. I don't think we can rely on that.
Councillor Barney.
Yeah, thank you. I found this actually quite helpful, and it is defining my view, so I'm glad we spent time on this. And I think the officers did a good job actually of trying to explain the position on town centre and why this is justified. I have understood that, but I think that the comment that therefore the recommendation to approve is based on that this being defined as a town centre, and that actually, as it turns out, being quite suspect in terms of the reality, not the technicality of how you've got there. I think that does help define very clearly for me that this is not a town centre in any way, shape or form. It is a very small parade of shops in a residential area.
Councillor Ellis, please.
I think we're getting hung up on what is clearly not a well-defined definition. And because of that, it carries, in my opinion, very little weight. I think we have to address the common sense reality. And although I was probably in favour of officers' recommendations to start with, having heard from the people who live there and work there and know the area, I've changed my mind. And I think there is no reason to allow a fast food shop to occupy this particular position. I think it adds nothing to the amenities for the community. All I can see is downside for the residents. So I am opposed to officers' recommendations.
Would anybody else like to make any comments or questions about this aspect of the application? Okay, Councillor Birch quickly, and then we'll move on to the next step.
Thank you. Yeah, and as the officer said, you know, it's open to our interpretation. If that's the case, I'm like Councillor Ellis, I'm minded to go against officer recommendation. I don't think the definition is tight enough. And I don't think the answers have been, what's the word? Not coherent, but you know what I mean. They've not done it for me. They've not convinced me. So I agree with Councillor Ellis.
Understood. So Councillor Matthews, I'm going to go back to you having cut you off earlier. What should we move on to next?
I appreciate that, Chair. Thank you. I was going to talk about the parking issues, and I don't know how you want to run it. Yeah. Just whilst we're on this, this is there's 7 or 8 units, I think, because there are some upstairs ones around the corner as well here. So it's and when we're looking at that definition of a parade of shops, just to finish off on that. If we had the definition, if we adopted that definition, there's a small parade of shops. West Bridgford has lots of small parades of shops throughout it in lots of different places, quite a few of which have hot food takeaways on them. So if we adopted that definition, none of them would have takeaways in West Bridgford. So I don't think it's I think it's a bit of a red herring, personally, and I think the bigger issues are the other bits that the residents were concerned about. From a parking perspective, again, a lot of those other units are daytime use units. So in the evening, that car park isn't well used. It's mostly well used by the store next to the vacant unit that this application is about. I was going to say I frequent that shop quite frequently. It is my local shop, and there is a constant flow of traffic, predominantly in the evenings as people pop in, buy something or post something. I think it's mostly used as a postal pick up and drop off. Certainly my daughters use it an awful lot. But I've never really experienced massive issues with parking. It's usually short periods of time. I know that the residents have concerns in the close. But whenever I've used it, the parking is relatively good natured and short term, and people generally are very considerate, in my experience of using it over the last 20 years. The highways had no objections whatsoever, and as I said, there's 7 or 8 units there, apart from the Go Local shop, which is open till 10, I believe, in the evening. The rest of the units aren't open past sort of 5 o'clock. So a takeaway will be relatively evening based, and I think would actually complement some of the other businesses in some regards as well. From that perspective, the traffic. I've got other things to say about other things, but
thank you. Anything else on the highway aspect, Councillor Barney?
Yeah, I think Councillor Matthews makes a good point about the differentiation between daytime use and evening. I've never been there in the evening, but I have experienced issues more than once in the daytime, and that might be the common factor, and that might be my poor driving, which I'll happily accept. But it's actually a very narrow area, so you basically end up with a linear line of parking, certainly in front of the hire shop, which is where I go, and that can create flow and contraflow issues. And I've been in situations where there's been aggression there as well because of that. It's not really a fantastically well designed designated parking space. I think even referring to it as parking, it's kind of an area that's become parking. Actually, it'd be much better really as just a pure pedestrian area. So I don't really accept that there is good or sufficient parking here to serve what's already there.
Nobody indicates anybody else indicating speak with respect to highway. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, Councillor.
I wasn't following it round the corner enough, but it was a bit of a walk, and some of them are upstairs. What I do have a lot of experience of is takeaway parking. I have a phone full of photographs, and let me tell you, the people that do deliveries, and indeed people that do pickups for their own orders, don't bother with any parking regulations whatsoever. I have hundreds of photographs on the road that I live on, which has several takeaways, but had 2 main ones that are relatively recent. And for some reason, and I don't know why this is, but in the city, it seems that we get more cyclists doing deliveries. And admittedly, some of those are using illegal electric motorbikes. They are not cyclists. However, where I live in Lady Bay, they don't seem to use cycles. They use massive cars with 1 person in them and a box at the side. And they park regularly on double yellow lines in front of people's driveways. And in any other place, we're completely on the pavement. So I think the fact that people are concerned about excessive parking from a takeaway is a very specific problem. And I am aware that that will be a difficult matter to use as evidence due to the fact that, as usual, the County Council highways have not objected. Nevertheless, I do think it is a valid point to raise, and I think people just don't understand how bad it is nowadays with people who are delivering and collecting takeaways.
Thank you. Anything else on highways? Yes, Councillor Georgie.
I have used Boundary Road, and one of the times it was when I was coming to council, so it was about 6:30, and coming down Boundary to the junction that takes you onto Loughborough Road, that is an absolute nightmare to turn right on. The amount of anger and people just pulling out in front of people was ridiculous. So to bring more traffic down Boundary Road or Loughborough Road to turn right onto Boundary Road, I think is going to cause masses of issues.
Okay, very good. I'll come back to Councillor Matthews because you have more. Yes, where should we go next?
thank you. I was just also wanting to touch on the parade itself in terms of this unit has been empty now for some time. prior to the cycle shop that was there that closed. It was empty for some time before that, and previously it was the newsagent before that. Local businesses need business to survive and thrive. So again, it's a finely balanced one in my view, but I just want members to consider the impact and the benefits that having a used parade of shops actually brings to the community and the wider community as well. So, and a couple of people commented that there are lots of tenants waiting for units in West Bridgford. Well, this one has been vacant for some time. There are other units on other small parades of shops that are vacant, and I have some sympathy with the landlord who is trying to bring back some life to this parade of shops and his business as well. So I think that's something we do need to bear in mind. And do we want an empty parade of shops that is dying, or do we want something that actually will be used and bring custom to all the shops potentially as well? So that's another factor that I just want people to consider in their deliberations as well.
Councillor Birch.
Thank you. Yeah, and I echo that. Obviously, the small business owner myself, yes, we do need to factor that in. Obviously, business rates, jobs, etc., benefits, and again, not rehashing it, but to me, in my head at the minute, it comes down to that definition. I would go for this all day long, all for businesses starting. The only thing that was holding me up was the definition of town centre. So.
Councillor Barney.
So again, I think Councillor Matthews makes a good point and a valid point, and that's why I said at the start my mind was unmade up on this, because I absolutely recognise the importance of commerce and the values that this could bring to people who don't live in the immediate vicinity to it, but pretty close. And we should turn down planning applications. We should always do that, as a last resort, really, to go against the officer's recommendations where commerciality is concerned. So just to validate, I agree with you on those points.
Where next? Councillor Calvert.
What about going to the noise and smell from the extraction of the frying up of hot food? In my own ward, I have a particular problem with that, with terraced houses backing on to the premises facing another road, which are producing all these fumes and noise, and it's a continual problem. So with this one, there's a reference to a previous application in 2025 for this is the garage that's been redone between two houses, and it's a dessert shop. Unfortunately, I haven't been up to check it out, but this reference to the fact that the dessert shop has hot food. I'm just wondering how much hot food it's actually preparing, and whether this has set a precedent for what seems to be a much larger scale takeaway with hot food and the need for extraction vats and so on.
Thank you, Chair. So it's fully appreciate, obviously, the application. I think it's the garage, the other side of the convenience shop. I don't know the details of that, but members are here to consider this current application on its own merits. Obviously, policy 26 of the local part 2 does talk about a percentage of hot food takeaway uses within these centres of neighbourhood importance, and it sort of it says that anything over 30% of the total number of units wouldn't be acceptable. And with the dessert shop and this one, if it were to be approved, would equate to 28.6% of the units, so under that 30% threshold. In terms of the noise, the odour, the extraction flues, I don't know the details of that particular application, but obviously we've just got to consider the one that is here in front of us.
So it's 28.6%, which means it doesn't quite reach the 30%, which would cause a problem. But is it units, or is there any any calculation that includes the amount of floor space or the scale of the developments, just specifically units. Okay, thank you.
The policy talks about 30% of the total units.
Councillor Barney.
Paragraph 45, just ask for clarification. I'm not bright enough to understand what it means. In terms of odour, the proposed extraction flue would be in a reasonable proximity to a window serving a first floor flat at 73 Boundary Road. What does reasonable proximity mean? Is this a good or a bad thing? Are they going to stink or?
So 73 is the one to the north, so the one that's the Go Local shop, and there's a first floor flat that's on the rear of that property. So the extraction flue is there, and the elevations I think actually shows first floor flat window is there, so in much closer proximity to the flue than the residence on Ralph Close, and that's the first floor flat, and that sentence there just says that it's in close proximity, and obviously the environmental health officer who provides us with the comments considers that that's an acceptable relationship, even there being a first floor flat there, subject to obviously the conditions and the detail being submitted.
Does anybody have any other points to make? Councillor Matthews.
Just a question, if I may, on the proposal. It says that prior to installation, the details of the extraction ventilation system need to be provided, and along with sound levels, etc. Are you able to clarify what the decibels or the sound level is that is acceptable for these units? I suppose that's one of the residents' concerns. Obviously, we know what the physical separation between the properties is from the maps, but can you tell us what the sound limit is, and how that would be conveyed over that sort of distance?
As often with these types of equipment, sometimes the end user isn't known. So the extraction equipment is obviously based on whoever comes into the premises. Condition 5 is the condition that talks about noise levels for the equipment, and that requires the details to be submitted. So the condition doesn't require a cap of a certain level of noise, and that's not something that the environmental health officer has suggested in their comments. It's just that the information needs to be submitted for it to be considered acceptable, and if that information about the equipment isn't acceptable or inconclusive, and that's the second part of the condition, then the applicant will be required to undertake a full noise assessment in order to ensure that the plant equipment is capable of operating without causing a noise impact on neighbouring properties. So there's not a specific target or level, but that noise assessment. So that would be for consideration at the discharge of condition stage, to ensure that the impact doesn't have an impact upon neighbouring properties as a result of the equipment that's going to be installed. Hopefully.
But you can't tell us what that level of noise would be considered an impact.
The noise impact assessment needs to be in accordance with the method that's set out in that condition, but I can't give you a level or a threshold.
I'm not trying to trip you up if it's not your method, your field of expertise. I was just trying to get a rough idea of what sort of noise level would be considered appropriate. That's all. Thank you.
Are there any other matters that members want to raise that they haven't had opportunity to do so yet? Councillor Mallender.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise paragraph 33, please, which I realise that the problem is this designation as to whether or not it's a neighbourhood centre or a town centre. But paragraph 33 is very firm on hot food takeaways being within walking distance of schools and other places where children and young people congregate. And yes, I realise that that's where the designated town centre comes in. But we know the problems with child health and obesity, and as well as that, litter that people have, and also those delivery vehicles that are driving around there producing air pollution. All of these things add up to a detrimental effect on child health. And I just think I won't be voting with the recommendation for this, because I think that it's startlingly obvious that this is not a large enough area for that to occur, for it to be in place, and also that it would have too many detrimental effects on the community, and particularly children in the area and children who are going to those local schools.
Thank you. And we seem to have kind of naturally returned to where we started, which I think has kind of exercised most of our minds. And I think essentially, if there were to be a recommendation to refuse planning permission, and that was on the basis that the application would be contrary to paragraph 97 of the NPPF, then the bit I think I'm still trying to work through is that as a matter of being sure that it is contrary to that paragraph, bearing in mind, we all approach this on layman's terms. Is it in the town centre? Look at it. Is it the town centre? No. But our officers, the professionals, have advised us that on their reading of the glossary and what it means, then yes, it is. So that's, I think, just wants to air my the challenge that I'm feeling at the moment. We've got Councillor Matthews and Councillor Birch, I think.
Thank you, Chair. I think I already slightly raised this earlier on. I think the whole thing of walking distance from a school is a bit of a red herring. If you adopted that definition for refusing planning permissions for every takeaway in the whole of West Bridgford would be refused, because every single one is within walking distance of a school. So I think for me, the officers have outlined that it's within the plan, so it fulfills that definition. And I think the fact that there are schools nearby is a bit of a red herring, because there are schools nearby every single one of the takeaways within West Bridgford, within walking distance.
With the key bit being, and also in the town centre, right? So that's where we're focusing our mind.
We have a lot of parades of shops.
Yeah, sure. Councillor Birch.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I would like to propose something, see what the committee thinks, if this can be moved to the next meeting, pending some more clarity, perhaps a site visit, or something along those lines for a bit more information. It's obviously got to be right. My concern is if we go blatantly against the planning law, then this opens the council and therefore taxpayers up to liability. This has to be right, and to me it all hinges on this. As I've said, just to make my position clear, I'm pro-business and I would always support an application like this. The crux of this is the definition of town centre. And if we're going to say it's subjective, and we, to a degree, we can say we don't think it's a town centre, it's a parade of shops, then that obviously the section about the proximity of the school comes into play. And on that basis, I would reject it. But I must admit, sitting here now at the end of this meeting, I do not feel sufficiently informed and that I understand that aspect of it in its full legal sense. So I don't know what the committee thinks, if that will be sensible, or what everyone thinks. I'll open up to discussion.
Yes, the rule on deferrals is they're discouraged, and really we should only approve that if the adjournment is going to actually achieve something. So you need to apply your mind to, would extra time actually allow you extra clarity on this point? Or would you actually end up in the same position the next committee meeting?
To my mind, I would like a clear report by officers on this particular issue in detail, explaining very clearly, point by point, the legal basis, everything that we need to make this decision.
I think what you have to consider there is the officers have given their clear interpretation and said it is our interpretation. It's quite likely that extra time will not actually cast any more clarity on that question than we have now.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. I was minded to support this application to begin with, purely because of the business aspect that Councillor Matthews has raised. I am personally extremely pro-business, and I would always approve a planning application if I thought the economic benefit to the local and wider community outweighed the disadvantages. I run a business myself for over 20 years, so I'm about as pro-business as you can get. But you have to take into account the downsides of this. And I think we've got enough information before us to say that the downsides outweigh the upsides.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I mean, I've been listening to everything as much as I can. My ears aren't very good at them today. But on paragraph 34, it does say, whilst the application site is within walking distance of several schools, the site is within a designated centre of neighbourhood importance, where such a use, blah, 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 is considered acceptable. A decision to refuse the application would not be considered justified in this instance. Now, I don't know whether that says it to me, that makes it fairly clear to me. If anybody else has a problem with that, with paragraph 34, then they have a problem. But I take that as correct. Am I wrong?
Well, I don't. Especially, but it's not necessarily for me to say. For me to say whether you're right or wrong. The question is of interpretation of that policy, and that's the interpretation that has been reached. Are there any other points that people wish to make? Because if there isn't, we're going to need a proposal being initially proposed and seconded. Councillor Barney.
So I'm just going to say again, I know we've been over this to death. I've agonised over this, truly agonised it to the degree where who would ever want to be on a planning committee, because I totally get the comments, I suppose. But there are a number of reasons why this feels like it might not be quite in the right place. And I think the officers have absolutely explained chapter and verse why they've come to the conclusion on the definition of the planning status of this. And that's been enforced by the local plan part 2, which we've adopted. So I completely get that. but I think I'm going to go with Councillor Ellis's position in the balance of favour. I don't want to make the wrong judgment, and I don't want to bring up a blight in the local community. So I'm happy to propose that we do not support the officer's recommendation.
So I think we know the questions that are going to be next. For what reasons?
We need to take into account all the criticisms that the local residents made, and we've heard about traffic problems, pollution problems, detriment to the immediate residents, and there's also the question of need. Is it needed? I don't know whether that's a material planning consideration. But I think we can put together sufficient reasons for objection.
So and possibly the proximity to the school argument as well could be applied. Terms.
Thank you, Chair. So just picking up on the point Councillor Ellis mentioned about the need, the policy supports hot food takeaways in these locations subject to the criteria. They don't need to demonstrate that one is needed or not needed in that location. So I just err side of caution in that regard. And similarly, in terms of the residential amenity impacts upon sort of noise, odour, comings and goings, vehicles, etc. In the absence of sort of a technical consultee not objecting, again, I'm just sort of conscious that if the application is refused and it sort of heads towards that appeal stage, and we don't have that technical objection support to back us up either from the environmental health team or the highways team, then again, those reasons may be challenged at the appeal stage. Obviously, in regards to the definition, whether it's meets the 97 town centre or not, that is something which again could be, we've taken the view as officers. If members want to decide differently, I would just need to understand, is it, although it's designated as a town centre, a centre of neighbourhood importance, is it because it's a small parade of shops? I'm just trying to understand, tease out sort of the reason for refusal. Why?
A duck quacks like a duck. It's a duck. It's a small parade of shops.
Any other reasons?
So similar to previous application, I'm just looking at sort of understanding some wording and making sure that that is represents what you've sort of put forward. So I think it's worth highlighting that the site is within a designated centre of neighbourhood importance, but it's not considered to be within the town centre as defined there, given it forms a small parade of shops of purely neighbourhood significance. And as a result, because it's providing a hot food takeaway outside of a town centre and within walking distance of schools and other places where young people congregate, so again using the wording of the MPPF there, the development would fail to promote or achieve healthy lives and communities, contrary to paragraph 97 of the MPPF. I've not included any local plan policies in that, only because our policies, as far as I'm aware, don't talk about sort of healthy hot food takeaways in the same way that paragraph 97 refers to. And that would be one reason for refusal. So obviously you mentioned others, but
Councillor Chaplin was indicating.
Can we use impact on the character of the area? So paragraph 37, specifically it requires that development should function well and add to the overall quality of the area. You know, Councillor Mullender and I know very well what takeaways have done to Lady Bay. It has not enhanced the area at all.
So paragraph 37 of the report talks about well-designed places. So that's more about sort of the character of the area in terms of if they were making changes to the front of the building, or the, you know, how the proposal would look in terms of its visual appearance.
So when it's talking about functioning well, it means the actual physical building functions.
Yes.
Okay, so we can't use that.
It's the previous section which talks about principle of development, and the policy which talks about vitality and viable centres, and that's where the 30% sort of hot food takeaway provision comes in that regard.
Councillor Ellis.
Have we included the parking and the motor issues? I know you said that the fact that county highways had not disapproved of this made that argument a little difficult. But the fact is that county highways are probably understaffed, and they don't go out and visit the majority of sites. It's just a desktop exercise, whereas people we've heard from tonight actually live there. And I think that carries more weight for me than the highways opinion.
So is the concern that you're raising in respect of impact upon the amenity of neighbouring occupiers, or is it impact upon highway safety?
No, I think both.
And that's as a result of the parking provision, or is it the frequency or the comings and goings of vehicles? Again, it's just so I can try and.
I think that there clearly is a parking problem. It sounds as though there is probably insufficient space on the road. I can't recall the name of it. Behind. We've heard how the cars are parked either side of that, making access and egress difficult. These are all things which affect people on a daily basis. How on earth can highways really sorry, need a glass of water. How can highways, doing a desktop exercise, understand the detail of this?
Is that a natural question or a rhetorical one? I think, well, the answer to it as the actual question is because that's how they fulfil their function as a technical consultee with respect to highway safety.
But what I'd like to do, Chair, if we can, because I'm mindful of the danger of appeal and what it might cost the council, I would like to try to mitigate as far as we can the effect of highways decision
I don't know, it's up to others to say how they think that could be achieved in light of the position that we're in with respect to the technical responses. I don't know whether anybody has input on that.
Sadly, we've been here many a time before. We all know and we've all seen highways say that things are perfectly acceptable when they're clearly not. But unfortunately, we can't do anything about it. And unless they say so many applications that people have quite rightly raised these issues, and then the resulting application, when it is built, has in fact caused those problems, proving us all right. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, because highways are the technical consultees and we can't really go against them. So I'm afraid we have to look on those other concerns that we have to use to back up our decision.
Councillor Chaplin first.
So trawling through, looking for reasons to object. What about paragraph 31? Point, which one? Not C, not cause significant adverse impact on the amenity of nearby residents and occupiers. Could we go for that one?
Is the concern, sorry, I think but is the concern about the frequency of cars coming and going to the proposed hot food takeaway, or is it the lack of suitable parking on the property, or a combination of both? Combination. Okay. Thank you.
I agree on both of those points. And I think we could also bring in the nuisance points being raised in paragraph 33. There will be adverse impact on the dwellings immediately adjacent.
Okay, so I've just, again, similar way to the previous reason as well. So it's considered that the frequency of visits to the proposed hot food takeaway, accompanied with the shortfall in parking provision at the site, would result in an unacceptable impact on highway safety and the amenity of the neighbouring occupiers, notably those on Ralph Close. And then the proposal would therefore be contrary to We're still sort of pulling the policies together, but we've jotted down policy 14 of part 1, policy 1, which is development requirements of part 2, as well as policy 26, which is the centre of neighbourhood importance policy criteria C, which is the one that was just mentioned about not causing significant adverse impact on the community of neighbours, and F, which is providing appropriate provision for servicing and parking. And if it's okay with you, Chair, we can sort of refine those policies and make sure that we've captured any others. That's okay.
Councillor,
Yeah,
are you happy with
I'm
that?
happy.
Well, that's an accurate
continue with the proposal.
summary. So, Councillor Barney's proposing that planning permission be refused for the reasons outlined there. With is there a seconder? Did you do it already? Sorry. With Councillor Ella seconding. Just before we invite people to move the vote, is there anything else that anybody wants to say who's not had the opportunity to do so? I need to check that. Very good. So the proposal is then the application the permission is refused subject to the conditions referred to. I'll ask all of those in favour to indicate now, please. Got it. Those against? Abstentions? Very good. So that the outcome of the decision of the committee is that that permission be refused subject to those reasons. We now move on to the final item. Those of you that aren't here to hear about existing planning appeals, please feel free to leave. But the last item being planning appeals.
Thank you, Chair. So again, just appeals to note. I will just highlight one, which is which was the one that came to committee, and it's the solar farm in Weissel. I mentioned it at the committee last month, and it's just noting on there. Again, welcome any questions now or afterwards. Thanks.
All right, very good. Thank you. Good evening, everyone.